And that was George Zimmerman's brother there. Here with more insight on the verdict in the Zimmerman trial, our legal analysts, Sezen Oygar and Jonathan Brenner. Once again, welcome back to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Bridget.
As you have been here before, last week you predicted it. You said you thought there'd be an acquittal in this case. Jonathan, why do you think that happened? What did the prosecution do wrong?
Two things come to mind. First of all, the prosecution overcharged this case. They really had to. The public perception, the public pressure made them charge second-degree murder. I think that gave them an impossible burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman did not act in self-defense. Secondly, the prosecution put on witness after witness that were unfavorable to them, that testified contrary to what they thought, and many of those witnesses responded with an "I don't know." Those witnesses should have been prepared for months and months. They should have known the answers. You can't have a witness, particularly on the prosecution side, who doesn't know the answer to their questions.
Sezen?
I think it boils down to something very, very easy. It's promise and deliver. What the prosecution said that they were going to do is they promised us that they would prove George Zimmerman was racially profiling. They promised us that they would show us that George Zimmerman didn't have to kill Trayvon Martin, but that he wanted to. And unfortunately, the evidence did not establish that. In fact, in their closing arguments, the prosecution said, this case is not about race, and that wasn't the truth of the matter. When you look at the jury instructions, legally, this case it really was black and white. You just had to follow the black letter law. And when you look at the reasonable doubt, the self-defense jury instruction, if there is any reasonable doubt as to whether or not George Zimmerman was justified in using self-defense, you have to find in favor of the defendant. And that, I believe, is exactly what happened here. And while this is an emotional and it's a little bit hard to swallow, this verdict, I think they got it right.
Well, that's what the defense attorney said last night. This was a reasonable doubt case. It was not a civil rights case. The prosecution tried to make it a civil rights case, and I think they fell flat. I think they had a lot of pressure. I think they tried to make an emotional case. Prosecutors are not emotional by nature. Usually it's the defense attorney who stands up and gives an emotional closing argument. In this case, we saw the prosecutor get up and give a very emotional closing argument, and we saw the defense attorney get up and become very professorial and explain to that jury what the law was and how it should be applied to these facts.
Now, given that, the prosecution following the verdict said that there have been some changes in the law as a result of what happened. Now, I know the jurors have to rule on what the law was as it stand at that time, but some of the insights in this case really shed light on the system, a system that the defense says failed George Zimmerman, but also a system that may have also obviously failed Trayvon Martin. What do you think post-trial as far as the legal ramifications of what happened in Sanford?
I think we're going to get really taking a look at what stand your ground law is and whether or not that should really stay on the books. The governor of Florida just this past year, he actually really took a look into stand your ground and whether or not, because this was passed when Governor Bush was in office, and they had a task committee look at it and they said it should still stay on the books. But I think when you have a case like this, and then you also have to look at Florida has additional penalties where because the manslaughter charge, because a firearm was used here, it went from 15 to the maximum of 30. So which side is it, Florida? Are you going to have the stand your ground where you can basically mow down anybody, or are we going to prosecute and put further penalties on people because you're using a firearm?
I think we're going to have a discussion of the stand your ground laws, but I think the much more interesting and broader question are the social issues here. There were a lot of moving parts in this case. You had Trayvon Martin, an African-American young man, 17 years old, killed. Horrible situation for his family and for the Zimmerman family. You have Zimmerman, who initially was identified as perhaps being white. Turned out he identifies himself as Hispanic. And you had 6 jurors, all women. 5 of those women were Caucasian, 1 was Hispanic. Very interesting racial issues here. There'll be a lot of discussion going forward. Many people in the community are very disappointed in this verdict and think that justice was not done. I agree with Sezen. The law was followed, but did we get justice in this case? That's the big question.
Your thoughts real quick on that, Justice?
Innocence and not guilty are two separate things. I think it'll be interesting to see if we have a civil action, whether or not stand your ground will grant civil immunity. But of course, George Zimmerman is responsible for a 17-year-old's death, and that's something that everybody feels very poorly about.
Sezen Oygar, appreciate it. Jonathan Brenner, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you.